All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fox Sports The Gambler. This is Bending the Edge, running back edition, your NFL draft show. We got combine week, so I went with the cutoff for today's show, of course. But this episode, Nick, that we're going to be breaking down the running backs, going the same kind of course that we did last week with the quarterbacks, a bit of a crash course on some of these top guys in this class. Look to, in the next 45 minutes or so, hit on the top 5 to 10 running backs, however many we get to. And I think the running back class is a much more advanced class, a much more kind of hyped up class than the quarterbacks that we just recently talked about. So I'm intrigued to hear what you think. We have a historic running back in Ashton Jeanty at the top of this class, looking like a potential top 10, definitely lock first round pick. But excited to get into this class, a deep class. What are your just initial thoughts on this class? And I guess compared to the quarterbacks, how much more advanced is this group?
Yeah, I love this class, man, especially compared to the quarterbacks. I think this is a pretty deep class. I think there's a lot of running backs in here that could just fill out some nice roles for a lot of these spot teams that need an extra, change of pace. Whole class is pretty deep for what we've been used to. Obviously, with Genty coming off one of the greatest running back seasons of all time, and then right behind them, there's a few Amari and Hampton and both Buckeyes running backs. I think there are a lot of options for teams that need a change of pace back in their backfield.
Yeah, when you kind of look at, we talked about it last week with the top 10 with the quarterbacks. When you look at teams in like the top, 15, 16 picks with the running back, you could definitely see a team like Chicago kind of going all in on the running back spot, getting Ashton Jeanty as another piece there for Caleb Williams and that offense, because he kind of have that Jahmyr Gibbs type role, I think, in Ben Johnson's offense. You look at Dallas, obviously their running game was a disaster last year. They have no one really to lean on in that spot. And maybe even a few other teams at the top here that could depend on some running backs. So I think there is a legit chance we see, definitely one go with Jeanty, and we'll talk about some other guys, but maybe even two. I think it's going to depend maybe on how some of these guys run at the combine and just overall grades, because it goes back to what we were talking about with quarterbacks last week. But it doesn't really seem like there's a real consensus this year. There could be a lot of surprises, some of the more eye-opening kind of picks that we see in the draft this year compared to years past. So that it's going to make for a fun draft for sure. And we'll start at the top there with the Heisman runner-up, one of, if not the best running back seasons of the past decade in all of college football. Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State, listed at 5'9", 215 pounds. Nick, how do you think his game translates to the next level? And do you think he's going to be, ultra productive as he was at the college level?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he has future All-Pro written all over him. I think he reminds me of Maurice Jones-Drew from watching the games that he's played in. He's led the nation in missed tackles forced, yards after contact, rush attempts, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, this he's putting together an insane year, average 185 rushing yards per game, 100-plus rushing yards in every single game this year. 2 games with 4-plus rushing touchdowns. I mean, the productivity was absolutely absurd. You can't tackle him. His vision's insane. A little smaller on the size at 5'9", but the way he runs, he's a bowling ball out there. I think you put him in really any offense, he's going to succeed.
Yeah, super exciting player. I thought the thing that stood out about him the most throughout this season was just, and it kind of, you can kind of do it hand in hand with the level of competition he played, but the ability to make guys miss tackles. It seemed like anytime someone had to, bring him down, it took at least 2 to 3 guys, or at least the second or third kind of attempt. Just his ability to make guys miss, break off tackles. That was the most kind of impressive part to his game for me. But he also kind of had that Saquon element to his game as well. And we saw it in a handful of games this year where he would have, 2-3 yard carries. Everyone would basically just be selling out and try to stop him. And then he has that home run ability where it's, he's got 12 carries for 30 yards, but then the next thing you know, he's taking a 75-yarder to the house.
Yeah, he's got that home run, big playability at any time the ball's in his hands. Even as a receiver, I mean, he's not, the best out of the backfield, but he's a capable, productive, dual threat weapon in the backfield. All you got to do is put the ball in his hands. He'll make people miss. He'll make plays. Like you said, at any time he could just hit a home run just like Saquon has. Right, froze for a little bit right there, but guess we can move on to the next one. We're looking at Amarian Hampton out of UNC, 6', 220, big, well built, great size, runs insanely downhill at all times. Like Genty, he just bounces off defenders. Last 2 seasons, very productive, over 530 carries, over 3,000 rushing yards, 30 rushing touchdowns. Also is complimentary in the receiving game, 595 receiving yards the last 2 seasons. So he's also a workhorse, 300 plus touches. They give him the ball, and he's shown that he could handle a heavy workload. He reminds me a lot of like a lesser of a Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs, like that bully ball run downhill. But yeah, he's been productive. 10 of 12 games, he rushed for over 100 plus. So I'm a big fan of Amarian Hampton out of UNC.
Yeah, he's a guy that they've been saying in the streets a bit that he could sneak his way into maybe the back
Yeah.
half of the first round if he could combine good pro day potentially. What are your thoughts on potentially that as well?
Yeah, I really wouldn't be surprised. The back half, maybe like a Broncos, if they really want to go at the help their backfield, because they haven't been able to develop Javonte really, or he hasn't really been able to stay on the field. But yeah, I would not be surprised. I don't know if I really have him in that first round talent, but with the way teams, take swings and chances on offensive weapons nowadays, I would not be surprised if he goes in the back half of the first round.
And UNC's had a pretty good run on running backs over the past, almost decade or so. A good track record there. Guys under Mac Brown going to the next level as well. Do you think that's something that teams kind of take into consideration as well? I feel like it's a kind of basic question, but UNC, you don't really think of them as such a great team, but they have had a good track record of running backs over the past decade.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at the coaching. You can't, just go out there and play and just act like, stats will come. If you're in a good system that'll operate well for you and you buy into it, you could definitely, make a case to increase your draft stock. And, that just shows, you buying into a coaching system. NFL coaches will see that and even want that even more. So I can 100% get behind that.
All right, next guy that I want to get into are the two guys out of Ohio State with TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Before you get into breaking down either of those games, if you were a GM and you had to select one of the backs, who would you take between the two? Or is it more so of a dependent on kind of the system you run, who you would take out of those two guys?
Yeah, I think it really is dependent on what system you run. Like if you're looking at Henderson, you're not really looking at like a workhorse and give him the ball a game. He only averaged 9 carries per game this last season. So I think if you want more of a workhorse, you would go Judkins. But Henderson, he's got also that big playability where he could have 10 rushes. I mean, just for an example, 10 rushes, only like 30, 40 yards, and then boom, he just breaks one out, and then he looks like he has a good game. But he plays the game smart, very good patience. He lets his blocks set up, good vision. Only had 2 fumbles in his career, 667 total combined touches, and only 2 fumbles. So ball security, job security, everyone always talks about that. So I think he's one of the best, Henderson, one of the best blockers out of the backfield. So you add that pass protection or in your offense, I think that's another tool that NFL coaches will look at.
Yeah, the big playability, I think, is something that has always been a thing in the NFL. Obviously, want to create explosive plays, but I feel like we've just been seeing more and more of that, and that's the kind of difference makers in these top tier type of teams. Like you look at from start to finish, the top 2 teams in the NFC this year, I think, were the Eagles and the Lions. And what did they have? Explosive running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon could take it to the house at any moment. You look at a guy like Jameson Williams on the outside as well. It all kind of comes down to explosive plays. You look at the Commanders and the great year that they had. Terry McLaurin, a big play receiver, kind of every step of the way throughout his career, and now he finally gets a good quarterback. And look at him; he has a career year. So explosive plays, I think, really are kind of the name of the game right now, and what separates these kind of mid-tier teams to these top-tier teams. So TreVeyon Henderson is a guy too, and I think you look at the touches, like especially this year with him and Judkins, neither one of those guys got overloaded with touches. When you look at Agenti, and I forgot to talk about that, do you kind of take anything away or lower his draft stock at all for the amount of touches and the amount of tread on the tires he's had compared to a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, compared to a guy like Quinshon Judkins, who have had significantly less touches than Genti has?
Yeah, I can definitely see the argument for that. But just watching his film, watching the games, you look at him and you're like, that's a player. It doesn't matter how many, you could feed him every single time. And obviously in a system like Boise State, in a conference where they're in, he's going to be getting the ball pretty much the entire game. And, he's going to make teams pay for it like he did. So I guess you can really put some stock into that. Obviously, you look at the carries, you look at the touches, it's going to be, a big difference. But I think the production that he put up with those carries, that says enough for itself.
And then what are your thoughts on the other Ohio State back? You touched more on Henderson. What are your thoughts on Judkins? I feel like at times, I thought he was going to be a monster at Ohio State. And as we know, their offense took a little bit of time to kind of get cooking as the season went along. And obviously they had that great run there in the playoffs. But I feel like he was underutilized a little bit. What are your thoughts on him and kind of the season he had after transferring from Ole Miss?
Yeah, I did expect a lot from him. It's kind of hard, obviously, but like we were talking about splitting the carries with Henderson. But he's more like the violent type, run like right through you, the physical, body type. He's got the prototypical NFL size, 6 foot 220, good strength, runs with, violent. Like I said, he just wants to run right through you. But he's also got that like contact balance that we talked about with Genti. It takes multiple people to bring him down. He is also one that protects the football, only 3 career fumbles on 800 career touches. So he gets the ball out and he secures it. So, and 3 straight seasons of 100 plus rushing yards and 14 plus rushing touchdowns. So, even though we were talking about, the volume that he was getting, the production is still there. He was SEC Freshman of the Year, SEC first team all SEC 22-23 seasons. So, I mean, he puts up the numbers, and I think he'll be able to fit in an offense really well.
And when it goes to draft stock for both these guys, Jenkins and Henderson, where would you be, comfortable taking either one of those guys?
I think probably like I would go like late round 2, early 3. I mean, you could also wait a little bit and get some guys down the board, but I think guys like Jenkins and Henderson, teams are going to want, players like that in their backfield.
All right, we stay in the Big Ten now, and a guy that I'm not as familiar with his game, and he's coming from a school that isn't traditionally known for their offense of skill players, tight ends, offensive line. This is where this team kind of thrives, and then a lot of guys on the defensive end. But he had a really good year this year. Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, 6 foot 225, listed, I believe, as the same measurements as Hampton. We'll get some more exact measurements on these guys this week because I feel like a lot of these are kind of round numbers, projection type things, but we'll get those official measurements from the combine. But Caleb Johnson had a great year this past year at Iowa. That offense really took off with him kind of as the lead guy this past season. The offense was really built around him, and Iowa was able to actually score some points this year, not win games 10-6. So what are your thoughts on Caleb Johnson and his role at the next level?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like you touched on it, I can't believe Iowa's offense actually was a team that was scoring points. We don't really ever see that from a team like Iowa. But speaking of Caleb Johnson, he's just violent. He's a great shot, like a mix of his athleticism but with size, and then he's also got the finesse and the violent, in his game. He's really versatile. Like he's a man of many talents. Consensus All-American Big Ten running back of the year. Very good. not very good, but capable out of the backfield. His footwork's great. He's got the great IQ, lets his blocks set up, got the strength to break those tackles. I think he could improve in the pass protection from what I've seen. But I think he's someone that could also be a change of pace back in the maybe late round 2, early round 3, like the Ohio State running backs. But I think he's more than capable to being productive in the NFL.
Yeah, his game is I think you kind of hit on the head, like more finesse. It was interesting to see Iowa kind of have an explosive player. You think more of a just 3-4 yards and continue to
Yeah.
move the chains type thing. It was interesting to see that kind of curveball for Caleb Johnson. Tyler Algier though I think is a pretty interesting comp, because he does have that kind of downhill running. Do you see that, in his game, or is that primarily just like a size type of projection for you?
I would say it's both. I would say the size and the play style they both play with. Algier has that change of pace, like we were talking about with most of these running backs. Change of pace with with Bijan, how he runs. You get him in on third down, those downs. I think he can make a difference. And I also put down there Trey Benson coming out of Florida State. I like that comp to him too. Just the way that they can come in and make plays happen, and you just get the ball in their hands. Play, good players will make good plays. So I think he's up there with one of the best in this draft class.
All right, we're going to keep it rolling here. Some rapid fire, go about another 10 minutes or so. Hitting on the running backs, which is a deep class. We could probably talk for a few hours about the running backs. I'm interested to see. I don't know what the record is off the top of my head, but I think there's a good chance that this is a record-setting class just for the amount of running backs that are picked. This is another guy that I think he didn't get as much attention this year because Kansas struggled a little bit. They really started picking it up as the year went on. But he's been a fun player over the past few years, and kind of the resurgence or the ascent of Kansas football, and that's Devin Neal, the running back there, 5'11", 220 pounds. Past 3 seasons, it's gone over 1,000 yards in each season. He's been an extremely productive player, but as I said, you didn't really hear his name that much this year. I think due to Kansas' kind of lack of success, at least at the beginning of the season. What are your thoughts on Neal going forward? And another player that he did have a lot of touches in college. He was a really productive player, but with that comes a lot of wear and tear. How do you kind of evaluate both of those things hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, that's both great points. Devin Neal is one of my favorite running backs of this class. I think he is going to make an impact on Sundays. He changes speed so well from the passing game, you just get the ball in his hands like we were talking about earlier. Good players make good plays. You get the ball in his hands, and single-handedly from watching him against Iowa State put up over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on us and beat us, he is one of the most electric running backs in this class, I think. He forced almost 130 missed tackles in the last 2 seasons, only 2 fumbles in the last 2 seasons, so he protects the ball. Great out of the backfield. Always gets those extra yards, fights for those extra yards and those first downs. I think he's a mix of that Bucky Irving type and Travis Etienne. I think he had 8 games over 100 rushing yards as well. So I think he can definitely make an impact on Sundays.
Bucky Irving, anytime you hear that name, I think it's kind of an eyebrow raiser because he had an awesome season and he was a really productive player at Oregon, but a guy that, at Oregon, I feel like all their running backs historically have been super productive, but haven't really amounted to much at the next level. But Bucky Irving had a great year this year. I think if you probably looked at least fantasy football production over the past, last 7 to 8 weeks of the season, he probably was right up there with like Saquon and Jahmyr Gibbs as one of those top 2 to 3 running backs from this past draft. So if you're able to get a guy like Devin Neal and get Bucky Irving type production, that would be awesome because Bucky became a really fun player to watch as well. Where do you kind of see Devin Neal's draft stock as Irving was like a 3rd, 4th round pick?
Yeah, I kind of see the same, maybe even late, like 5th with how this class is. I don't really know how Devin Neal, because I don't think he's going to test very well. He's not the fastest. He doesn't have that, top end speed. He can definitely improve in pass protection too. But I just think he's such an electric player that he'll be able to go into any really offense and just know his role and make a difference. So I think he'll probably go like 5th round, I'd say. And then, at best, 4th, early 4th, late 3rd.
Yeah, that's another kind of question I wanted to pose to you as well. Like with being such a deep class and such a good class, you're really high on Genti and his ability to be a potential superstar type of player down the road. But how do you view that being like, all right, if you're the Bears and you're a team that, we saw last year, they had a lot of troubles, they had a lot of issues. Is it worth it to sit there and pick Genti at 10 or get a guy like Devin Neal in like the 3rd or 4th round? How do you kind of view that? Or is Genti just such a good player? You're like, it doesn't really matter to you where you get him. You just need to have him on your football team.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Genti's there when the Bears are there and they go after him. Just with like with Ben Johnson coming in, we saw how he did with Montgomery and Gibbs. I really wouldn't be surprised if the Bears go out and get them. But this is a class. If you do miss on that Genti type, you're able to wait and get, a productive back. And I wouldn't be surprised if they, take a chance if he is there, the Bears, even someone to trade up for him. I would not be surprised if Genti goes that early and then teams just start to, fade off and try to wait and see how the rest of the draft falls.
All right, let's hit on 2 more before we get out of here. I'll give you kind of your pick, Nick. If you had to give like 2 shout outs to guys, one that's, another one that you feel like is a must know, and then another running back that's more of a sleeper type. Give me 2 guys that you would want to pick on, but before we head out.
Dylan Sampson's one that I want to talk about. He's not very elite at really one type thing. He's very well rounded. Good patient runner, just waiting for the blocks to set up. He was top 10 in missed tackles for, so he's another one that is hard to bring down. It's just the ball security with him has always been an issue. He needs to improve on that. Not really used in the pass game either or pass protection, but high motor, high effort player. I think he's someone that he was first team All SEC, put up almost 1,500 rushing yards. He's someone, and we watched him play against Kentucky. We watched him, single-handedly move a pile for a touchdown again in that Kentucky game. So, he's got that high motor, high effort. I think a team will be really excited to have him in their backfield. And a sleeper, or I guess not really a sleeper, but someone that not really anyone's talking about that much is Virginia Tech running back Rachel Tootin. He is going to kill this combine. He is going to run out of – I think low 4.3s, I think he's going to run. Elite speed. He had another one of those home run big play abilities whenever he touches the ball. It's just he's another one with the ball security. Coughs up the ball. I think he coughed like 9 fumbles in the last 2 seasons. I think I saw. That's not good at all. He kind of reminds me of like a Chase Brown, like can catch the ball out of the backfield, and once he gets the ball in space, hard to bring him down.
Yeah, that's a eye-popping number, 9 fumbles in the past 2 seasons. But if you're talented and you can get on the field, like that's even a guy that you could potentially look to use it in the return game as well, especially with the speed. And we'll give one last shout out to our guy. I mean, you got a list here, a good list of guys that we didn't even get to touch on. Damian Martinez, Ollie Gordon. But the one guy that was my favorite player to watch at college football this year, Cam Scadaboo. I'm very interested to see what his opportunity looks like at the next level. He's not an overly fast player. Obviously, he's not going to be able to maul guys, run guys over like he did at the college level to the extent that he did. He probably still will have a few nice angry runs, but he's a guy that I'm definitely going to have a close eye on throughout the NFL draft because he has produced game after game, and you can argue even his most impressive game was against Texas, who was probably the most talented, the best team that he played all year.
Yeah, I mean, watching him in that game was just electric. And he produced his whole entire career. He was Big Sky Offensive Player of the Year when he went to Sacramento State, first team All Big Sky. He's done this his whole entire career. He's a bowling ball. You got to have 3 tacklers on him at all times. Goes out there looking for contact. He goes out there looking to hurt people. He was one of only 2 running backs in the class with 100+ forced missed tackles, and the only other one was Genti. So he's up there with those contact balance guys that, it takes a whole village to bring him down. But yeah, he's going to be exciting to watch. And I think in the right offense, he could definitely make a difference.
All right, well, that'll do it for episode 2 here of Bending the Edge this week, running backs. Next week, we'll hit into the receivers. And, we talked about how the running back's a little bit more of an advanced class. Interested to hear your opinions on the receiver because I've seen, a few mock drafts that have, 3, 4, 5 going in the first round and then some that only have 1 or 2. So a spot in this draft that's a little bit more all over the place. But we will be back next week here on Fox Sports The Gambler. As always, drop a like, drop a subscribe, and we'll be back next week on Bending the Edge, talking wide receivers.